everyone, and Happy New Year. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Sierra, also known as C's Library for those of you who are new here. And this is the start of my 2025 bookish year. We have a lot to do today, including setting up my January reads, talking about my 2025 reading goals, talking about my 2025 most anticipated reads, and These Books Will Self-Destruct in a Year challenge. So let's get right into it. So first things first, let's talk about my 2025 reading goals. When I started Bookstagram in 2024, the start of 2024, I was not sure what goals to set. I only set a number for how many books to read because I wasn't really sure about my reading habits at the time because I didn't read very often. So now that I do have a grasp on what I like to read and what I want to be doing with my reading, I have a lot more goals for this year. My goal for 2024 was initially 50 books, which I thought was crazy at the time because I hadn't been reading very much. And I kept passing that number and then having to make the number bigger and then passing that number and having to make the number bigger. So it went from 50 to 80 to 100. And then I finished changing my goal at 130. And I even passed that. I read 145 books last year, which I'm so proud of, and it's amazing. I'm setting my goal for 2025 at 140, which is higher than my last goal, which was 130, but lower than how much I read last year, because I don't want to put pressure on myself to finish books that I'm not feeling, which I admittedly did a lot of in 2024. I think this is still a pretty ambitious goal for me. But I'm not like dead set on it or anything. If I managed to read 30 books this year, but I really enjoyed all of them, then I'm happy either way. I just think 140 is achievable for me to enjoy 140 books, but we'll see. My next goal is to do 4 buddy reads. In 2024, I did about 9 or 10 buddy reads, which is a lot since I had never done a buddy read before 2024. And it felt a little bit too much for me. So I'm not trying to limit myself to 4, but I'm trying to keep the goal lower so that way I'm not overwhelmed by all my buddy reads. My next goal is to read 1 nonfiction per month. If you know me and my taste, you know that I like to read about the world and sustainability. I like specifically nonfiction nature books. I don't make as much time for it as I should because I see all these fancy little fantasy books and then I end up reading those because it's a lot easier to get into. But I do want to make that time for myself to connect with the nature in nonfiction, so I'm doing 1 nonfiction per month. My next goal is to annotate at least 1 book a month. I love having pretty books on my shelf with all these sticky notes and notes in it. So I'm trying to add to that collection with at least 1 book per month this year. On top of that, since I am annotating at least 1 book per month, it means that I will at least read 1 physical TBR per month. My next goal is to read at least 1 poetry book per month. I have a lot of poetry books because I am really interested in poetry. However, I don't manage to make time for it, just like the nonfictions. I end up getting swept away by the fantasies. So I want to make time to read those books on my shelves and get those poetry going. My next goal on my list is to offload at least 10 books. I've done a whole sweep of my bookshelf at the start of this year, actually right at the end of 2024. I only have this 1 bookshelf. I'm not much of a collector like a lot of people on Bookstagram are. If a book isn't at least 4 stars or 5 stars, I just don't see a reason to keep it in my collection. So this goal is to help me keep things uncluttered. I don't want to keep books I don't love because it's just not worth it to me. There's no reason for it to be on my shelf. So this goal is to help keep me accountable on which books I like and which books are worth being on my shelf to me. My next goal is to attend at least 3 bookish events. I'm hoping to for sure go to our Las Vegas Book Festival in October because I went in 2024 and it was a lot of fun. And I did a couple other things last year. I tend to feel a lot of anxiety about going to bookish events. I don't know, probably that mindset, I'm trying to remember what it's called, but when you don't really feel like you belong, imposter syndrome. I think I get imposter syndrome at bookish events because I feel like I'm not going to talk about the same books as someone else or whatever. I don't read the same things as them or I'll feel left out. So I end up feeling a lot of anxiety and then I miss out. I don't want to do that to myself, so I'm going to push myself to go to at least 3 bookish events in this year. The final and the most important goal for me is to enjoy what I read. In 2024, I admit I finished a lot of books I really didn't want to. I pushed myself to because I have this anxiety about wasting time. So for this year, I want to make sure I'm not thinking about a number of books to achieve or what to consume. I just want to be mindful about what I'm reading and enjoy what I read. Otherwise, it's not really worth it because it's just supposed to be fun. On top of my yearly goals, I have set a monthly goal for each month. You can see more of that on my Instagram at seas.library. But for my January goal, I will be reading at least 2 poetry books. This goes along with my yearly goal of reading 1 poetry book per month, but I just felt that poetry would be a beautiful way to start the year, so I will be doing that this month. Now let's talk about my most anticipated reads of 2025. The first book on the list, and it's not in any particular order, is If Only I Had Told Her. I read the first book early last year, as a buddy read with someone, and I really liked it. But I read it on Kindle Unlimited, and then I didn't have Kindle Unlimited. So I finally have a copy of both books, so I'm going to read this one now. I think I'll probably cry during this book, but we'll see. If you haven't read this book or the first in the series yet, it is about childhood friends who grow up loving each other, but not knowing how to tell the other person, and they end up with other people. It's a bit teeny of a book. But in the end, and it's not really spoiler because it is told on the back of the first book and in the first chapter of the first book, but one of them ends up passing, and so it's a little heartbreaking, but it is a good book, so I'm excited to get to this one. The next book I'm excited to read for 2025 is Foxglove. I read Belladonna last year on Kindle Unlimited, but again, like I said, I don't have it anymore. I don't even know if the other ones are on it, but I did buy a copy of Foxglove and Wisteria. I don't have a copy of Belladonna yet, so hopefully I'll get that too, but these ones are on sale, so I'm excited to get to the rest of the series. The Belladonna book is about a 19-year-old who enlists the help of death to discover who is killing her guardians. It was such a good book with so many surprises in it and emotional impact to it. So I'm excited to get to this one. The only thing I know about it is that it introduces a new character, Fate, who is Death's brother. So I'm really looking forward to this one. The next book in my 2025 anticipated reads is Saving Six. I read Binding 13 and Keeping 13 last year on a recommendation from my sister-in-law. And this book I wasn't going to get to for a long time because it focuses on a different main character, the brother of the female main character in the first 2. However, my sister-in-law put it on my 6 Friends 6 Reads, so I have to anyways, but I am excited to get back into this series. The brother, Joey, who is the main character in this book, has had a rough life and has made some bad choices. So I think it'll be a little rough for me at first when reading this book, but I'm excited to see what happens. The next on my list of anticipated reads is Blood of Hercules. This came out late last year, and I have seen so many reels about it already. So many people are loving this book. It is a retelling of myth, Hercules, and I don't know much about it besides it's a dark fantasy, but I really do want to read it because the clips on reels and stuff, those look so good, and I really want to read this one. The next up on my list is Beneath These Cursed Stars. So the series this is connected to, These Hollow Vows, is what got me back into reading at the end of 2023. And so I really wanted to read this one immediately when it came out, but I hadn't seen any sales on it. It came out in July of last year. And so I've been keeping my eye to find a sale for it because I just don't like buying books at full price when I have so many books to read. But just last weekend, I found this one on sale for half off. So I am super excited to finally get to it. This one is a spin-off of the sister of the main character of These Hollow Vows. I don't really know much about it besides the fact that Rosalind is now taking out enemies of her sister and herself, and so I'm excited to see what happens in this one. Okay, so the next one up is The Night and Its Moon. In late 2023, my boyfriend and I had bought the 3rd book in this series for some reason, and when I started to read it, I was like so confused because we didn't notice that it had this little number here telling you that it was the 3rd book. So I stopped reading it, and I just this Christmas got the first book in the series and the second book, so I can read all the way up to the book I have. So I don't know much about it, but I am excited to read this one. The next one up is A Dark and Hollow Star. I've seen quite a bit of people reviewing this one, and they all seem pretty positive, so I am excited to read this one. I found it at my local used bookstore for $5.99, and for a hardcover, that's kind of a steal, so I'm excited to own a copy and get to read it. It's a fantasy. I don't know much about it, but it looks to be featuring a very, I don't know if you could use cuss words on here, a strong female main character, so I'm excited for this one. The next two on my anticipated releases are 2025 releases, so I don't have copies to show while I'm talking about it, but the first one, and probably my most anticipated read of 2025, is The Ballad of Falling Dragons. The first book, When the Moon Hatched, was easily one of my favorite books of 2024. So I'm really excited to get to continue this series. I don't know much about the sequel except that the first book ended off on a good cliffhanger, so I'm excited to see where that goes. This series is just so good of writing. It's a really long first book, and it's going to be a long second book, but I think that it pulls you through it so easily because it is so well written, and the plot is great, and the characters are great, so I'm really excited for this one. The next book I'm looking forward to read, and the final one of this list, is Fearless. If you've been following along with me, you know I loved the Powerless series, and I loved Reckless, and so obviously I'm excited about the third book in the series. As the title of the first book implies, Peyton is powerless in a world where everyone has powers, and she gets pulled into this kind of Hunger Games like tournament to showcase all the powers of the elite, and she has to survive because she is faking being like a seer type person, by observing really well what other people do and act, kind of like Sherlock Holmes. So it's a drama, it's a romance, it's a great series, so read it if you haven't. And that's it for now. I'm sure there will be lots more books I'm going to be super excited for during this year, but those are the ones I'm the most enthused for right now. Next up for today's video is the These Books Will Self-Destruct challenge. Basically, this is a contract with myself, saying that if I don't read these books within a year, I will be offloading them. These are books that have been collecting dust on my shelf, or books that I'm just not super sure I'd ever read. And this just gives me that extra push to read it before the end of the year, because if I didn't, obviously I didn't care about it enough to keep it on my shelf. So let's get right into which ones they are. The first book on this list is The Earth Hums in B Flat. I bought this on a trip last year, and I was super enthused about it at the time. I was like ready to go home to the hotel and start reading it. But since then, it's kind of lost its appeal to me. I don't really know why, I just don't feel like picking this one up. So I'm hoping that by putting it on the list, I will definitely read it before the time's up. The next one on my list is Life on Planet Earth. And I am just not super into sci-fi. I genuinely do think this would be a good book if I sat down and read it. But I just can't get myself to because I don't really like sci-fi. So I'm going to try to give it a try this year. But if I don't, I just feel like it would be better on someone else's shelf who is more likely to read this one. Okay, I'm going to talk about all three of these books together because I got them all at the same place. They are Promise, The Doublet Affair, and A Gracious Plenty. I participated in this little event at my library where if you read a certain amount of books or read a certain amount of time, you would get a little coupon for a free book in their little section that they have for books that they no longer want to keep in the library and are selling. When I was going through the section, I honestly didn't find books that caught my eye. These three were kind of like the best of what was there to me. But they've kind of just sat on my shelf since, so I feel like maybe I just shouldn't have gotten any of them, but I did, and so I want to give them a try since I do have them, but they've just kind of been collecting dust, so if I don't read them in a year, I will offload them. The next one is Red, White, and Royal Blue. I'm not much of a romance reader, and I got this at a time where I was still trying to figure out what I like to read, but it hasn't interested me yet, so I just put this on the list because I don't genuinely see me reading it this year, but I have a hard time putting it up for offloading because it is a pretty popular book, so I kind of want to give it a try. So if I do it this year, then I can keep it if I like it, but otherwise it's time to offload this book. The next one is called, I don't know how to pronounce this, Rhapsodic? Rhapsodic? I don't know. This one I got when my sister-in-law was offloading a bunch of her old books, and I haven't read it yet because I was warned that it was a little smutty, and I don't like smut, if you know anything about me. I try to avoid it in my books, and if I do come across it in a book, I just skip past it. However, something about this cover and the way she warned me just makes me feel like it'll be extra smutty, so I've kind of been afraid to even flip through the book. So this one is on that list. The final one on the list, and it's on the list because I didn't know I was going to get the first and second book for Christmas, which I mentioned, is The Gloom Between the Stars. I put this on my list because it's been sitting on my shelf and I didn't have the other two books. So I figured if I didn't at least get the other two books and start reading the series, then there was no reason to keep it on my shelf because I wasn't ever going to get it probably. So this is on my books to read before the end of the year, or I have to offload it. And that's it for those. So now let's move on to seeing what my first reads of the year will be. So for 2025, I have made this little basket of different reads that I want to get to, my TBR on both my Kindle, on my shelf, and etc. In this little basket so I can pull them out. I originally wanted to do that thing with like the mini books that you make, but I just didn't end up having time with all the holidays and stuff, so maybe later this year I'll make that, but for now I have a little basket to pull names out of, so we are going to do that today. On top of the books that I pull from my little TBR basket right now, I will have 2 arcs from NetGalley that I have to read, 2 poetry books because I didn't include poetry in the basket, but if you remember, January's challenge is to read 2 poetry books for me. And then I also want to dedicate time this month to cleaning and setting myself up for the year. So I'm only going to be pulling 5 books from this basket. I usually read about 10 to 12 books in a month, sometimes more, sometimes less. So I'm going to pull 5 and hopefully get to all 5 on top of the other ones I have to read. I have no idea how many books I have in here because I have a lot on my Kindle and then I have the ones on the shelf. So we will see what my first read will be now. Hey, it's me from the not so distant future. I realized that I forgot to say a couple things about the books in my, the ones I picked. So I'm just recording again to talk about those real quick. Blood, Metal, and Bone. That one I have right here, so I will definitely get to this month. Blood, Metal, and Bone is one that I picked up from the bookstore a while ago, but I didn't really start it just because I didn't know much about it after my first reading of the back cover. I was interested in it, and it was kind of one of those ones that just ended up sitting on my shelves, so I'm excited to read this one now. My second read will be Greek Myths and Legends. That one's also a physical copy I have. It's a pretty thick one. Not like a lot of pages, but it's heavy. So the pages are a little thick. But I do want to read this one, so I'm excited that that was there. The Greek Myths and Legends one is a purely nonfiction. Well, I don't know if you can call it nonfiction because it is myths. And myths aren't really fiction. Aren't really nonfiction. But it is this one that's just about the myths. It's a really thin book, but they have really thick pages. It's kind of like a textbook style. But I am excited to read this, especially because I just read Song of Achilles. Song of Achilles last month. So I'm going to get to know a little bit more about Greek myths. Next up is Beneath These Cursed Stars. So I do get one of my anticipated reads on here. Yay! And that one, like I said, I do have is a physical copy, and I'm really excited for that. Yay! Next up will be Blood of Hercules. That's 2 of my anticipated reads on there, so I am super excited about that. These 2, as you saw, were on my anticipated reads, so I'm excited to start off a really good month with these 2 books. Maybe a third? The Infinite Moment of Us. So not one that's on my anticipated reads, but I think this one's on my Kindle, so I am excited to read that. No, it's not. This is not the book that I thought it was. I had a romance book recommended by one of my friends. This was not that. The Infinite Moment of Us is a book that I got when I was in, I think, high school, but I never ended up reading. It has a pretty cover. It's a pretty small book, but I just forgot about it. So it is on my TBR because it was on my bookshelf, but that was not the one I was thinking of. So it is not on my Kindle and it's not on my 6 Book 6 Friends. So the 5 reads I picked include The Infinite Moment of Us, Greek Myths and Legends, Beneath These Cursed Stars, Blood of Hercules, and Blood Metal Bone. I'm really excited for these reads. Obviously, some of them are more anticipated than the others since they were on my list. But I'm really glad I get to some of those really great reads I'm looking forward to, and some ones that I probably would have ignored being on my shelf. So I thought this was fun pulling out of this basket, so I might do that again next month. And so stay tuned for that. And that's about it for me today. So if you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. And I know this was a bit longer of my videos, but I enjoyed making this, so I hope you did too. Until next time, happy reading. My goal for 2024 was initially, I don't actually know how many books are in here. 1 second. That one's also a physical. Jesus. That's about it. So I'm rambling.